My name is Robert Silke, I'm an architect. Today we're doing a special private tour for the South African Friends of the Israel Museum. Everybody's come here today to see the hotel, more importantly probably to see the art gallery, the Jaffer Modern art gallery on the top floor of the hotel. Probably one of the only art galleries anywhere where you've got a first-rate international modern art gallery that has an ensuite pool deck. The pool deck is the most magnificent and ostentatious public gesture on the part of the owners of the hotel, the Jaffers, the same Jaffers from the Jaffer Modern Art Gallery. I mean, while the art gallery is this incredible public gesture, you know, because it's not about commercial imperative. It was about creating something on the level of a modern art museum on the top of a commercial hotel on Cape Town's Atlantic seaboard. And then on top of that, in a further public gesture, they built this roof terrace. We used what's often wasted on top of new buildings, it's basically an open roof, and created a whole world up here. One of our first clients, introduced to us by Jonathan Brohl, actually, was the Jaffer family, Muslim Jaffer and his wife Shafina Jaffer. Very interesting sort of property development power couple from Tanzania. You know, Brohl does a lot of retail letting work in Africa, and particularly in East Africa, and the Jaffers are very much into property in East Africa. They own chains of cinemas and Mr. Price franchises, and so they go in all the malls that the Brohls manage. Anyway, for various reasons, the Jaffers had had enough of East Africa and wanted to go somewhere more stable and first world, and believe it or not, that was us. And they had this dream that they wanted a hotel in Cape Town, and they'd like it as close as possible to the waterfront. And that's easier said than done. You don't just arrive in Cape Town. It doesn't matter how many millions you've got. It's not so easy just to find a piece of land that you can go and build yourself a new hotel on. The Jaffers approached me with this cottage, and they said, can they do an 80-room hotel here? So I was just starting out on my own, and I really wanted the project to happen. So I said, well, and it was zoned residential as well. So I said to them, well, if you can get a demolition permit for the cottage, and if you can get a rezoning from residential to business, and if you can get a height departure and a setback departure, and a parking departure, then maybe then we can do an 80-room hotel. So this was, I mean, it was well under construction during COVID lockdown. There was a big question over whether it would ever, you know, be finished. Would the developers pull the plug? But again, it's a very different story working for foreigners from outside the country who've got a slightly different outlook on things. Alvar Aalto, famous Scandinavian modernist architect, in his autobiography, he put the little Latin phrase on the opening page of the book, which is nemo profitum patrium est, which stands for no man a prophet in his own country. Sometimes takes a foreigner to come and have a little bit more imagination. So, I mean, the brief was, okay, they wanted 80 rooms, that's the easy part. Shafina, who's an artist herself, wanted an art gallery on the top floor. Which is a great, I mean, any architect, you know, would love to do an art, I mean, you want to do a cathedral and an art gallery during the course of your career. It's like an architect's bucket list. So when they said they wanted an art gallery on the top floor, that was great. And then it's not unusual to have a pool on the roof, but the brief was that the pool had to be visible for miles around, and that anybody standing outside the building had to be very aware that there was a pool on the roof. When the artist is no longer an innocent in the production of their own sculpture or painting, they become a propagandist, and it's why applied arts, which are in the service of a commercial enterprise, like architecture, is essentially a propaganda art. It's not to say that beauty cannot be achieved with propaganda art. I think what is underrated in this, particularly in Cape Town, it's a worldwide problem, it's a Western problem, that we underrate the value of beauty in the urban environment and in cities. It's not in that, you know, there's so much utilitarianism that goes into the design and production of new shopping malls, hotels, blocks of flats, etc. Beauty has the ultimate economic value, and the proof of that are the European cities. The European cities were constructed with very few other priorities other than advancing beauty. After World War II, Art Deco died and Bauhaus architecture died, and it was replaced with a very ascetic, financially ascetic, functionalist form of boxy square modernism, and it's a hegemony and a regression in design, I believe, that lasted basically from 1950 all the way through to present day. Somehow in 1950, people lost interest in decoration and sculpture in buildings. And while I've got no interest in copying Art Deco buildings or Bauhaus buildings, I do believe that if architects are to rediscover where decoration and sculpture in building left off, you've got to go back to where we broke with it. And we're talking going back to the 20s and 30s, looking at Art Deco and Bauhaus again.
Hi, my name's Sara. I'm the curator at Jaffer Modern Art Gallery in Greenpoint, Cape Town. And today I did a short tour, an art tour with the South African Friends of the Israeli Museum. And I walked them through the current show that we have going, which is Tell Me Three Things About Yourself.
This is kind of envisaged as God's window here. Obviously at this height in the building, any view out the top of this building is pretty good, right? So it doesn't matter what direction you look in. However, some views are better than others. The clients, quite understandably, wanted every view exploited up here. And we had a kind of a discussion between us that we only wanted this view. And we were going to block out all the other windows, which seemed, from a developer point of view, seems like heresy to block out those views. But from an art gallery point of view, you don't want natural light all over your art gallery. You don't want windows competing with the art. You kind of want to cocoon with the art. So we figured you'll come in, you'll get hit with the best view, because this is by far, you know, it's an unusual aspect, and many people don't really understand how this all works with the common and the golf course and the sea and whatever. We created 3 intimate, interleading gallery spaces that you could have 3 intimate exhibitions. To me, this is an art museum on a Cape Town scale. This is exactly what the city can sustain in terms of scale. You might notice that there is, in addition to the spotlights for the artwork in here that are on the tracks, you might notice that there is light coming from mysterious places. It's not altogether clear where all of the light is coming from in this gallery, and that's because we peeled the ceiling bulkhead down in front of the windows to conceal the windows, but the windows are not closed up. So the light behind these panels is bouncing around behind the panels, and you get an indirect kind of south light. Kind of imagine yourself inside an expensive light fitting, basically inside one of those floss Italian light fittings, and this place is designed to take whatever light it has and bounce it around without there being any sharp lines and any specific corners or boundaries or limits to the room. So you come here, you get this ethereal view over the common as if it's God's window, and then you come into this sort of cloudy ethereal space where it's bright and light, but you don't see any windows. You're not really sure where the light is coming from. And you're never permitted to stand more than 2.5 meters away from a piece of art. You're really forced to engage with the art instead of with the space.
Moving on from what Robert said, when I was curating this show, I really wanted to take into consideration the intimacy of the place and to really work with that. And I was looking at what's kind of happened in the past year, what everyone's been going through, where our emotions are, and the shifts that we've gone through as people, and just in our interactions within ourselves, with ourselves and with others as well. And I wanted to create almost like a journey for people to come in here and have a moment of introspection and grounding, because I felt that that was what we were really missing through all the disruption that we've had. So I wanted to work with the 3 separate spaces and kind of create almost like mini solos. And each of the artists was on I would say, a spiritual journey, a manifestation of their own kind of introspection in different ways. And so I wanted to create that by kind of allowing people to walk through. So the first artist is Sahla Davids. She's from Cape Town, and her work focuses very much on her family's ancestry. She's Cape Malay, so she explores their ancestry and their domestic life. Her grandmother and her grandfather were both seamstress and tailors, and almost that haberdashery environment was something that she grew up with, and she uses that medium to explore the historical, political and religious aspect of her family. So it really is a very religio-political journey. You know, it really takes you back. It's very nostalgic at the same time, but she's purposefully made it very uncomfortable, so it's unusable. You know, it's kind of looking at history in almost quite a poignant and painful way as well. So moving on from Sahla, we go into Amy Messenger here, who I would say from going from like a religio-political mode, we move into a bit more of an emotive space. So it was purposely created so that you could sit here and actually be immersed by her work, which has a very, I'd say quite a Renaissance feel to it. It does remind me of like the larger paintings in the earlier centuries where you were just engulfed by the work really, and you're overwhelmed by it. So she's exploring this concept of being overwhelmed by the sublime, something bigger than you. And she purposely works on that scale. And so you can take a moment here and kind of just be, you know, taken in by her exploration. We have the final room, which really speaks for itself. And I want you guys to be able to kind of spend a bit of time in there as well. It's a very peaceful room. Abdus-Salam, I would say that if we look at Sahla's from a kind of religio-political point of view, then we move to the emotion of Amy's. I feel when you arrive here, there's a level of clarity, like you've arrived, there's peace. And that really is what Abdus-Salam's work is about. It's really about balance, it's about peace, and it's about grounding. So his practice is very, so with Amy, she's a painter. He's also a painter, but he's a photographer. He's a painter, he's a videographer, and he spent a lot of time in LA. He grew up in LA, so he spent a lot of time on film sets. And so he really incorporates that into his practice. He's very technical with his practice. So he uses darkroom photography here. He uses painting, but he uses a very unique style of painting where he's not using a paintbrush. And he's really exploring the nuances and the tiny details of light and capturing that. All three of the artists are from Cape Town. They're all local artists. And
he was self-taught.
He was self-taught, which actually that's, all self-taught, completely self-taught. He moved to LA when he was quite young and moved back to South Africa a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And he went on a very spiritual journey himself. So he converted to Islam when he was about 10 years old, actually. And so even just that journey and that spiritual aspect of that and how he's explored that comes through in his work. It moves with you, so whatever lighting you have, it takes shape of that. And this work is really about, as he explains it, it's really about intention, really. And there's such a simplicity in his work, but it's such an intense process for him to arrive at that simplicity. And I think that's what makes his practice really interesting, and him really interesting as an artist as well. Actually, this was supposed to be an augmented reality, but we had a technical failure, but you can actually see the sand dropping onto it. It was quite fun. So that's also sand, yeah. So he really worked with what Robert had done with the curves and the space, and he was really particular. He'd wanted to, there's another show that we're working on, he wanted to cover the ceiling because the curves really kind of spoke to him. So that's something really interesting for artists as well, because it's a unique space. It's a very intimate space, so there's a lot you can do with it, like nooks and crannies here as well, which is quite nice. It's not just like a square box. Curating is really about storytelling, you know, and learning about each other and learning about the societies we're in and learning about other people's experiences and learning from each other. And it's such, you know, art is, it's a non-verbal way of expressing. So, you know, the world is open to say whatever you like in it, and I think that's really important, and we're really trying to take that into consideration as a space to bring in, you know, we're a small space, but there's so much you can do with a small space.